14 underrated low-budget indie horror movies better than mainstream films. One does not need to wait for Halloween to binge on a dozen of horror movies. If one has to rely on the mainstream movies to pick from to watch, the choices can be limited, as most of the stories are more or less similar and they overuse the same tropes, even when it's based on a true story. There are times when low-budget indie horror movies surpass the mainstream in terms of how far they can push their boundaries. Indie movies aren't bound by the same restrictions the production puts on mainstream movies. And when indie movies push their boundaries, it unlocks a different level of insanity in terms of bizarre plot and the use of blood and gore. And some of them can put mainstream horror movies to shame when it comes to presentation and scares. Today, we bring you a list of 14 low-budget indie horror movies that you can binge post-Halloween. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Guys, the people in the pictures aren't his family.
1. Summer of '84. 2018. As the title suggests, the story is set in the year 1984 in the seaside town of Cape May. One would assume that the small town would be quiet and free of crime, but a notorious serial killer known as the Cape May Slayer was out on the loose, and 13 teenage boys had fallen victim to him. Davy Armstrong, a 15-year-old high schooler and conspiracy theorist, suspected that his cop neighbor, Wayne Mackey, is responsible for the disappearance of the kids. When he shares the theory with his friends, Woody, Curtis, and Eats, they don't take him seriously because of his track record for obsessing with urban legends and conspiracy theories. But they change their minds when Davy notices that the missing child on the picture of the milk carton was seen inside Wayne's house days before his disappearance. Although it sounds like a horrible and dangerous idea, the teenage kids begin to investigate the cop, who might be a serial killer, and document his daily routine. Although stories of children investigating crimes made for a good read in the Hardy Boys and Enid Blyton stories, children shouldn't try to stalk and observe a potential serial killer. Summer of '84 hides a couple of interesting Easter eggs in the movie, like how one of the missing boys appearing on the milk carton was the picture of a real victim of John Wayne Gacy. As the story is set in the '80s and revolves around a group of friends going through puberty, it somehow reminds you of a Stranger Things minus the alien-like creatures hiding under the Hawkins National Laboratory. The cop the kids are suspecting to be the Cape May Slayer is often seen wearing aviators similar to the ones worn by Jeffrey Dahmer. Don't let the presence of kids fool you in terms of the dark tone of the film, where the danger increases as the plot progresses. You may be tempted to think of the 80s as the good old days, but according to data compiled by Mike Amott, nearly 779 serial killers were active in the USA throughout the 80s. 2. Southbound, 2015. Southbound is an anthology horror film consisting of 5 stories intertwined with each other. In the first story, The Way Out, Mitch and Jack find themselves in the middle of nowhere, running away from their past, as well as mysterious creatures floating in the air. No matter where they run, the creatures continue to lurk and follow them around. As the creatures close in, things take a turn for the worse, and unexplainable occurrences take place. The second story, Siren, begins in the location where The Way Out ended. A group of friends, Sadie, Ava, and Kim, go out sightseeing after leaving the motel as the floating crest from the previous movie follows them. As their tires give up, they are left at the mercy of eccentric hitchhikers who seem to have ulterior motives. The accident, jailbreak, and the way in follow a similar pattern, and the stories continue with a different set of characters, as the new stories begin at the point where the previous one ends. The creators of Southbound had previously worked together in VHS. A lot of the scenes from the accident were centered on a hospital, and they were shot in the non-functional wing of an actual hospital. The stories in the anthology have the potential to be better developed, but where they lag in terms of depth, they make up for it with an adequate amount of slimy gore. Southbound is quite well received for a modern horror anthology film. Some parts in the stories aren't the easiest to grasp, but they still make sense. The floating creatures appear in all of the segments violence, and the characters seem to be stuck in their personal brand of purgatory, one they cannot escape from. Even though Sam and Dean have escaped from literal hell and purgatory multiple times in Supernatural, it's not the same for the characters headed south in Southbound. 3 Extremes, 2004. 3 Extremes is another anthology on the list consisting of 3 segments from the countries of China, South Korea, and Japan. The segments, Dumplings, Cut, and Box, follow the stories of an aging actress desperate to retain her youth, a film director held captive by one of his extras, and a novelist tormented by her nightmares. In Dumplings, the actress Miss Lee starts to buy dumplings from the mysterious Aunt May, who seemed to have found the secret to prevent aging. Miss Lee is horrified when she learns that the dumplings are made from aborted fetuses from a secret abortion facility. Instead of switching to anti-aging creams, she continues with her diet of fetus dumplings despite displaying side effects. But the question is how far Miss Lee would go for her dumplings once Aunt May's shop gets closed for good. In Cut, an extra kidnaps a successful director and his wife and blames his actions on the gap between their financial statuses. The difference in the lifestyle of the rich and poor is a recurring theme in Korean movies and dramas, as we have recently seen in Parasite and Squid Games. The extra wanted to play a sinister game of his own with the director and gave him the choice between saving all the fingers of his wife from being cut off or strangling a young girl. Box follows the story of Kyoko, a novelist tormented by the recurring dreams of her past life as a circus performer. Kyoko had a twin sister named Shoko, and she was envious of her as she felt that Higata prefers Shoko over her, and that envy made her take drastic steps that led to the accidental death of her sister. But her nightmare is far from over. As the title suggests, 3 Extremes tells the stories of protagonists who are pushed to the extreme ends of horror. The movies are directed by Fruit Chan, Park Chan-wook, and Takashi Miike, and all of them are acclaimed directors of the genre. If you are looking to dip your toes into the world of Asian horror movies, 3 Extremes is a bloody good place to start. 4. High Tension. Mary and Alex, 2 close friends, head to Alex's parents' house to spend the day. The day unfolds like an ordinary visit to the family house until a serial killer arrives at the doorstep and kills Alex's father. Hearing the commotion, Marie hides the evidence of her presence and escapes to another room. Finding Alex tied up in her bedroom, Mary tries to help her. The night gets uglier as the killer slaughters the members of Alex's family. As the killer drags Alex into his truck, Marie sneaks in alongside her friend with a butcher knife. The story takes a darker turn as the killer reaches the gas station and the night gets bloodier. After failing to reach the cops for help, Marie takes matters into her own hands, but an unexpected twist reveals disturbing information about the killer. The story is set in southern France, but the movie was shot in Romania. One of the scenes required so much fake blood that it kept leaking from the camera, even when it was used to shoot a different film. The film is filled with so much blood and gore that at times it diverts your attention from the plot unfolding. The actors pack a strong performance, and the direction is worth noting. Alexander Aja made this film with his childhood friend Gregory Levasseur as an homage to the horror flicks of the 70s and 80s as they grew up watching them. This French horror film spills so much blood that it doesn't stop flowing since the first kill. High Tension, known as Haute Tension in French, is the beginning, has the same tone as the slasher film, but this killer wields an axe without wearing a mask to hide the face. 5. Sleepaway Camp, 1983. During the summer of 1975, John Baker took his children to the beach, along with his partner Lenny. The beach vacation didn't turn out to be what he expected, as he and his son John died because of a freak accident. Being the only survivor of the accident, Angela is sent to live with her Aunt Martha. 8 years have passed since Angela moved in with her eccentric aunt and cousin Ricky. This is the first time Angela was being sent to Camp Arawak, although Ricky had been there before. Angela grew up as an introvert, and her quiet attitude made her an easy target for the camp bullies. It wasn't just the bullies who were attracted to Angela. The head cook, Artie, had also taken on an inappropriate liking towards the kid and tried to make a move, but he is caught by Ricky on time, who rescues his cousin by running away with her. Bizarre incidents occur around those targeting Angela, and the first one to suffer is the head cook, who gets scalded by a pot of boiling water. Kenny, another kid who had bullied Angela, dies by drowning, and his death is ruled as accidental. Someone out there is going after those who torment Angela, and the body count piles up every day. Sleepaway Camp ends with an unexpected twist that changes the narrative of the film.
It can't be. It can't be.
Nothing screams campy horror slasher flick more than a slasher film set in a camp. Apart from the twist at the end, what sets the Sleepaway Camp apart from other films in the genre is that most of the victims are children. Camp Arawak was an actual camp that Robert Hiltzik, the writer-director, attended as a kid. The movie went on to become a cult hit, earning 3 times more than the money used to produce it. Felissa Rose, the actress who played Angela, was only 13 at the time of the filming, and she was too young to see her own film at the theaters. Back in the days, the norm was to cast a younger-looking actor over the age of 18 for the roles of teenagers. Sleepaway Camp unintentionally ends up being an over-the-top movie with cheesy dialogues and crazy murders, but it's the ridiculousness that makes this early 80s slasher flick fun to watch. Session 9, 2001. Gordon Fleming was desperate to make money, so he pitched that he and his crew would be able to get rid of the asbestos in an abandoned psychiatric hospital within 2 weeks. The crew consisted of Mike, Hank, and Jeff, and they all had their fair share of use and flaws. Mike was the only one amongst them who knew about the dark history of the asylum. Jeff had a phobia of the dark, and Phil was going through a difficult breakup, and Hank was addicted to gambling. As the crew finally arrive at the site, the eerie atmosphere begins to get to them. Gordon could hear a mysterious voice calling out to him by his name, and Mike stumbles upon the recordings of 9 sessions with Mary Hobbs. She was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, a condition where the patient has multiple personalities. One of her personalities had committed heinous crimes. That night, Hank had returned to the site to collect the items he left behind, and he came across a lobotomy pick. The darkness and strange sounds get to him, and he gets attacked by an unknown figure. From the next day, he starts displaying erratic behavior, and it's not long before the asylum gets to the rest of the crew. Session 9 takes its time in unveiling itself as a horror movie. What started as an ordinary job of cleaning asbestos had turned into a psychological and horror nightmare. David Caruso had reported that he experienced supernatural encounters on the set, and he saw something pass by the window while shooting in Danvers State Hospital. He wasn't the only cast member to experience a spooky encounter. Even Peter Mullen reported that he heard a voice in his head that told him to jump off to see what happens while shooting on the roof. The location where the film was shot was originally known as the Salem Village, one of the sites for the Salem witch trials in the 1600s. It is no wonder that the Denver State Mental Hospital gives off an eerie vibe and ultimately drives the asbestos removal crew into literal and metaphorical darkness. 7. Tucker and Dale versus Evil. 2011, a group of college friends decide to go camping. On their way, they meet Tucker and Dale, who had just bought a cabin in the woods. Dale leaves them with the wrong impression while talking to Dana because of his awkward nature. As Tucker and Dale reach their cottage and begin to work on it, the college kids gather near the woods where Chad informs them about the Memorial Day massacre from 20 years back. The trouble begins when the kids go skinny dipping and Allison gets injured. Tucker and Dale come to her rescue and take her home with the intention to nurse her back to health, but her friends misunderstand the circumstance as kidnapping. As her friends attempt to save her, they accidentally keep running and jumping to their deaths, and it makes Tucker and Dale appear like slasher villains, and the unsuspecting duo assumes that Allison's friends have a group suicide pact. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil was shelved for 3 years prior to its release, although it had the potential to do well in theaters with proper advertising. The film is a combination of gore, comedy, and satire of the slasher genre. It is evident that the movie doesn't take itself too seriously, and that works in their favor. There's nothing funny about death, but the scenes where Allison's friends keep killing themselves accidentally by running through a tree branch or jumping in a wood chipper are brutally hilarious. The DVD special feature shows Tucker and Dale as the villains, as it is told from the college student's perspective. There's a sequence where Allison defends Tucker and Dale in front of her friends, but they think she's suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, and it gives a brief glimpse of the plot setting. The actors did a terrific job with the comic timings, and the story is original and refreshing. Despite being a low-budget horror comedy, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil has gained a cult following over the years. 8. Terrifier, 2016. The film opens with the interview of a disfigured woman, the only survivor of last year's Halloween massacre. During the interview, the host informs her that the accused, Art the Clown, might be alive and roaming on the streets, as his body had disappeared from the morgue. The woman in the interview refuses to believe her, as she had witnessed his death. When the TV host takes a dig at her appearance after the show, the woman literally gouges her eyes out. The scene shifts to last year's Halloween, where we can see 2 drunk friends, Tara and Dawn, walking down the streets after a party. As the two were in the middle of a drunken conversation, they noticed a guy in a clown costume lurking nearby and looking at them. The clown continues to stalk them throughout the night and follows them into a pizzeria, but he is escorted out shortly for messing up the bathroom. Tara and Dawn leave after eating only to find their tires slashed. As the girls wait for Vicky to pick them up, Art the Clown slashes the pizzeria workers. As the night progresses, he abducts Dawn and goes after Tara. What ensues is a night of terrors filled with gore and blood. Artie the Clown from All Hallows Eve returned in Terrifier to continue spreading the horror. Both of the movies have been made by the same director. It was based on a short film of the same name. Artie the Clown is nothing like Pennywise. While Pennywise likes to lure children into his hiding spot, Artie likes to stalk his targets and brutally slash them at one go. Artie is not an ordinary clown killer. He is practically a clown mask-wearing, machete-wielding slasher villain. The Terrifier starts as a well-paced movie that builds on the suspense and tension. The murders are well-timed, and they don't happen all at once. As the story is set on Halloween, it adds to the creepy atmosphere. Although it's not the only movie with a clown killer, it is certainly one of the good ones.
Stop!
9. Trespassers, 2018. The film starts with a couple being killed in the middle of nowhere by a man wearing a skull mask. Sarah and Joseph check into the house they have rented for the weekend, but they aren't sure if they are in the right place. But they went inside anyway, as the door was left unlocked. The couple had been going through a rough patch because of the miscarriage, and they are trying to hold on to whatever's left of their relationship. Shortly after, Estelle arrives with her boyfriend Victor, and they seem to have issues of their own. Their weekend getaway seems to be going well until an unexpected guest turns up at their doorstep. She enters the house with the excuse of making a phone call as her car is broken down, but there's more to her than she is letting on. It doesn't take long for the weekend getaway to turn into a nightmare. Trespassers takes its time to develop the setup, as we get to know all the characters and their wounds and weaknesses. The opening sequence would make you believe that the story is uninspired and predictable, but the third act makes up for all the disappointment. As the story unfolds, you get hooked on the characters as you learn more about them, including their dysfunctional dynamic. Even without the blood feast that transpires, the stories of the couples alone could be made into another movie. Although the film is advertised as a home invasion movie, one of the subplots focuses on illegal drug trade. In the beginning, the characters feel so vain and unrelatable that you almost don't want to root for them. But once the story takes a bloody turn, you find yourself cheering for some characters and cursing the others as you feel they had it coming. It's advisable to not judge The Trespassers by its opening sequence, as it does get better. 10. The House of the Devil, 2009. Set in the 80s, The House of the Devil is essentially the story of a babysitting job gone wrong. Samantha applies for a babysitting job after watching an ad and accepts the job because of the high pay, despite the odd nature of the situation. For the sum of $400, she agrees to babysit Ullman's mother-in-law, who is able-bodied. Megan drops her off at the remote location of the job and agrees to pick her up once the shift is over. But Megan doesn't make it back home as she gets killed by a stranger. Meanwhile, Samantha makes herself at home in her high-paying, easy job as she dances around and orders pizza. But her bubble bursts once she discovers 3 corpses lying on the floor and realizes they were the actual owners of the house. After being drugged by the pizza delivery boy, she finds herself in the middle of a satanic ritual as it was the night of an eclipse. The film was shot on a 16mm film to replicate the looks of an 80s movie. The film is supposedly based on true events, but the movie or the press releases didn't mention the true event it was referring to. During the 70s and 80s, there was an ongoing panic about occultists and Satanists due to the surge in cult-based serial killings. That era also saw the rise of slasher movies. The House of the Devil is part slasher, part haunted house, and part occultist. The House of the Devil takes its time to set the atmosphere and doesn't jump into the horror elements immediately after. The story unfolds bit by bit and the danger intensifies as the story progresses. The movie has some parallels with The Shining as both protagonists were lured into isolated locations for their jobs without being given the full description of the role from the start. The House of the Devil would fool you into thinking it's an 80s movie because of its retro filming techniques. 11. Near Dark, 1987. Can you imagine going on a date where you are turned into a vampire and your sire runs away immediately after? That's how Caleb met May, but she returns before sunrise to take him with the group before he is burned alive during daylight. May had been traveling with a group of vampires who aren't too thrilled about the new addition. Severin was the most displeased of them all and wanted to kill Caleb desperately, but he changed his mind upon learning that May has already turned him. Their leader, Jesse, allows Caleb to join them for a week to see how he adapts to his vampire life, but it doesn't help his case when Caleb refuses to hunt and feed like the others. His actions make him a bit of an outcast, but Mary agrees to hunt in his place and feeds him from her wrist. Caleb was having a hard time adjusting to life as a new vampire, while the others created chaos as they pleased. The situation gets worse for Caleb when his father turns up near the group of psychotic vampires in search of his missing son.
Dad. Son.
Near Dark was Catherine Bigelow's solo directorial debut, and her filmography includes The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. Even though it was a movie about a group of vampires, the word vampire never comes up. Their origin and functions, in comparison to traditional vampires, are left somewhat vague. They burst into flames under the sun, never seem to age, and appear incredibly strong. In the Vampire Diary, we have seen the vampires that can step out into daylight as long as they have a daylight ring, and they have the ability to compel people and get in their heads. They could also enjoy human food as long as they have a good amount of blood in their system, but the same cannot be said about the vampires of Near Dark, as we don't know if their reflection can be seen in the mirror and what kind of reaction they would have to garlic. Bigelow's vampires are adrenaline junkies who leave a trail of chaos behind them. Near Dark portrayed vampires in a non-traditional manner as creatures who are cold-blooded killers. 12. Kill List, 2011. Life hadn't been the same for Jay and Gal since they left the military. Jay still had PTSD from a secret and dangerous mission in Kiev. Shell, his wife, was getting restless as they were running out of money, and Jay still hadn't found a new job. One evening, Shell invited Gal and his girlfriend Fiona over for dinner. Shell had organized the dinner party with the hope to get her husband a new job, as Fiona was an HR manager. There was more to Fiona than she let on, as she excused herself to the washroom and carved a symbol at the back of the mirror and used a tissue with Jay's blood. The usage of blood and drawing mysterious symbols never indicate good news. Gale had a job opportunity for Jay, and upon Shell's persistence, he decides to take it up. The next day, they meet a shady client who gives them a hit list and makes them sign a blood pact as they go to eliminate their hit list. The victims seem to recognize Jay and thank him for taking their lives, and when they decide to end their contract, they find themselves in the presence of a cult. It's not long before the hitmen become the sacrificial target of the cult members. Kill List starts with a couple bickering about their finances as the wife had been overspending and the husband has been out of a job for a long time. The story takes a different turn after Jay and Gal take on the role of hitmen and go around killing the people on the list. The death becomes painful and merciless when Jay discovers that one of the targets had a private collection of disturbing movies, and he decides to go after everyone involved in the ring. The story takes a bizarre turn as they come across a cult while trying to kill their final target, trying to get out of the contract. The story takes a few unexpected turns from there on, and it is more twisted than the Hitman sequence. Kill List is essentially a Hitman movie, but with a supernatural twist. It is bewildering and disorienting in a good way. 13. Inside, 2007. It has been 4 months since Sarah lost her husband in a car crash. It is Christmas Eve, and she is expected to give birth the next day. She wasn't feeling the Christmas spirit as the loss of her husband had turned her distant and cold. She asked her employer, Jean-Pierre, to take her to the hospital and turned down her mother's request to do the same. Christmas Eve begins to turn into a night of terror as Sarah realizes she is being stalked by a crazy woman. The woman had turned up at the doorstep and tried to enter the house with the excuse of making a phone call. Sarah had denied her request, saying her husband is sleeping, but the woman knew that he died 4 months back. Sarah came to the conclusion she was being stalked after she discreetly took the woman's photograph from the window and noticed her in the background of other pictures. Scared, she made a call to the police, who assured her that they'll look after her. The crazy woman somehow entered the house and started attacking Sarah as she wanted to claim the unborn baby as her own. Inside, known as A l'Intérieur in French, was critically acclaimed as a new wave French horror film. It is a low-budget, gore, horror fest as the crazy woman, credited as La Femme, keeps killing and attacking everyone who visits Sarah and tries to protect her. La Femme loosely translates to the woman. It was the first movie to be directed by Julien Mari and Alexandre Bastillo, and their directorial debut is considered one of the finest on French horror of modern times. The plot unfolds slowly, and once the identity of La Femme is revealed, you understand the motive behind her actions, but she's not stable enough to root for. From the moment she stabbed Sarah with a scissor, the events that transpire gets crazier and bloodier. 14. The Love Witch, 2016. After the death of her husband, Jerry, Elaine moves to Arcata, California. The town of Arcata was tolerant to witchcraft, and that made it an ideal choice for the young witch to start over. And Elaine might be the one responsible for her husband's death. Elaine settles in with the help from her mentor, Barbara, and their interior decor, Trish. Elaine was in the pursuit of a new lover, and she performed a ritual to find one. She meets Wayne, a literature professor, soon after, and makes him drink a love potion during a romantic getaway. As a side effect, when Wayne gets too clingy, Sarah can't think of a way to get rid of him except killing him. The possibility of a potion that could reverse the spell, a spell to erase his memory, or the options of breaking up or ghosting him doesn't cross her mind. Every time Elaine uses the love potion, it backfires and leads to disastrous results. When Wayne's colleague reports him missing and Elaine's DNA is found next to his body, things get a bit complicated.
Everything regenerates.
The Love Witch was set around the late 60s or early 70s, and the attention to detail from that era, including the costume, makeup, and color scheme of movies from that era, makes it look like a 60s film. The story takes on a satirical spin on romance and casts a young witch, desperate for love as the main character. She wants to be loved by a man as she loves him, but the moment they get attached to her, she finds them clingy and annoying and kills them. Even though the film is labeled as horror comedy, the comedy weighs in much more than horror. In fact, the horror is not present in a traditional sense, but there's the presence of witchcraft, love potions, and death. If the story was told from the perspective of another character who has suffered because of Elaine's obsession with finding love, and the tone and music were changed, it would certainly become a bit darker. The Love Witch might not be a traditional horror flick where the witch is dead and haunting a house with new occupants. It tells the tale of a living witch and her struggle with romance, as everyone who is attracted to her somehow ends up dead.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.